Hello, my name is Peter Cinnamon. This is Kicking Match, and it is usually a podcast which is all about the Irish League. But if the title and the general vibe didn't give it away for a one-off bonus episode, this time it is in fact going to be all about the League of Ireland. Their new season for 2024 is kicking off this weekend, and just like last year, I decided to jump online, give a wee digital phone call to kindred spirit, podcaster extraordinaire, Kieran Burke from the Between the Stripes League of Ireland podcast, and see if he would do me the honour of jumping on a little podcast and answer some of my questions about the new league season. And if you haven't guessed already, he said yes. So I was able to ask him all these questions about, can Shamrock Rovers do it again this year? What are all these teams' chances potentially in Europe later on? Who are maybe some of the contenders for the league? And as well as that, I posed to him, what about that All-Ireland League? Did any of that money or talk potentially entice a League of Ireland club or two? All of that and more on the way. But without further ado, I'll leave you in the very capable hands of me from the past with the wonderful Kieran Burke. Joining me here again, pretty much at the same time as he did last year. It's great to welcome back to the podcast Kieran Burke of Between the Stripes League of Ireland podcast.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for having me on. Great to be talking to you, a couple of days before the President's Cup and a week before the big kickoff, I suppose.
Kieran, I listened back to our chat last year and most of it was based around, could Shamrock Rovers do 4 in a row in 2023? And they did just that.
Yeah, I think for many people, Rovers obviously doing 4 in a row, it's so historic and an amazing achievement. But I think a lot of people felt last season that Rovers were below par and below their best for much of the season, yet they still kind of cruised to the title in the end. So the big question this year is, can the likes of St. Pat's, who obviously ended last year on such a high win in the Cup, Derry, who again have invested heavily, Patrick Cuban, Daniel Kelly, players like that going up there, can they close the gap? Even a team like Shell's back in Europe for the first time in almost 20 years. They've done some good business. Damien Duff is there. What a character. Can they all bunch up and get that little bit closer to Shamrock Rovers? And can someone even possibly dethrone them? We'll have to wait and see. But I think Rovers going as favourites once again this year, goes without saying.
5 in a row, that would be some achievement for that side, even if it is Rovers.
Oh, it would be absolutely incredible. I mean, I'm following the league over 20 years, and last season was the first time I've seen a 4 in a row. I mean, we had the Dundalk dominance for best part of a decade, really, but they never managed 4 in a row. And for me, they were the best Irish side that I've ever seen, probably of all time. So what Rovers have done, you can't overlook it. It's incredible success. I think as League of Ireland fans, not everyone, obviously, I suppose fans and Pats fans won't agree with me, but I think people that want to see the league develop would like to see Rovers been that bit more competitive in Europe. I know they were in the group stages of the conference a couple of seasons ago, but I think once they got into the groups, they kind of took their eye off the ball a little bit and they just focused on making sure they won the league, and they didn't get out of the group stages, didn't perform well in those group games. It was obviously very disappointing. They went out in the first round of the Champions League last season to a part-time Icelandic team, now a team that actually ended up doing quite well in Europe in the end. But I'm not sure from the business Rovers have done in the off-season whether we will see them kick on in Europe, but I think they've done enough to probably again get that league title.
Is this the last throes of a super team they've put together, or as they've went along, have they been able to find bits and pieces so that they can reload for another continued run at this dynasty that they're building there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think the general consensus among a lot of pundits and supporters within the league last season was that Rovers would get their 4 in a row. They did that, and then we might see a big rebuild. But that hasn't really happened over the off-season. They've only brought in a handful of players. One of those players is Aaron McInnes, who's obviously been at the club previously, so he's going back there. They've brought in a goalkeeper from a first division team, Lee Stacey, who's just going to be a backup goalkeeper, really. They've signed a player from Cork City as well. So they haven't done mega business as many people would have expected. Obviously, Alan Mannis is retired. Ronan Finn has left and gone to UCD to see out the rest of his career. So they have lost a couple of very important players, but they kept the core of the squad together. I think there was a lot of speculation linking maybe Rory Gaffney with a move home to Galway. That didn't happen. He's there again. He'll be their key man again. They've got Johnny Kenny back on loan from Celtic. So it's pretty much going to be the same team we seen last year, bar the odd alteration here and there. The likes of McInnes, I expect him to slot back into midfield. But I suppose what we have to remember is Rovers won the title last season. Jack Byrne barely kicked the ball all year. Graham Burke was in and out of the team. Ferrugia and Clark, the two fullbacks, were injured more often than not. So if they could get a bit of luck injury-wise this season, then there's no reason they can't go and do that 5 in a row, maybe make that bit of progress in Europe as well. But this is pretty much the same squad again as last year, bar the odd change here and there.
Well, if Shamrock Rovers are the team to beat, let's go through some of those contenders that you mentioned there. Last year, we were hyping up Derry. Could they push on from their cup success? And in the end, a faltering start just continued on for them. And as you said, going into this year, St. Pat's have very much put themselves in the hat to be one of the teams that'll be nipping at Shamrock Rovers' heels this year.
Yeah, myself and Gary, we did a bit of a mini podcast last night ahead of the President's Cup, just on our behind our paywall service that we have for our members. But I put the question to Gary because it's something we've talked about on the pod a bit over the last season and a half. Who are actually the bigger challengers to Shamrock Rovers? Is it Derry City, as many people see it, or is it actually St. Pat's? And we were both in agreement last night that Pats are the bigger threat this season. Now, we could very much be proven wrong on that. I mean, Patrick Hooban is a phenomenal signing for Derry. If he goes up there, bangs in 20 plus goals, that could be the difference between the title and second or third place. But I think we identified last season a lot of issues we'd have with Derry in terms of a sustained title challenge. I think they need to look at their style of play. There was a lot of games where they racked up huge amounts of possession but very few chances. There was other games where they had plenty of chances and didn't take them. So that's where Patrick Hooban obviously will come in key. You'd imagine if he gets enough service, he will put the ball in the back of the net. But I think there's a few things that we just seen from Derry over the last season and a half that have cooled us slightly on their title chances, whereas St. Pat's, I couldn't be more impressed with the business they've done. I think Pat's big problem last season, Joe Redmond got injured at a crucial stage just when they were going into Europe. They went out of Europe quite early as a result. I think if they had Redmond, they might have got through a tie or two more. Gravosky, his centre-back partner, he was injured for about 6 months last season as well with a really bad knee injury. So they were without their strong, got into Europe and won the FAI Cup. And what struck me in pre-season is John Daly, he's signed a lot of central defenders. He's brought in Turner from Cliftonville. He's brought him in.
There is interest in St. Pat's with Turner, and then Connor Keeley went from Ballymena, had a season at Drogheda, and is a little gem according to St. Pat's fans as an addition there to the backline.
I obviously haven't seen a huge amount of Turner. I actually seen him play for Cliftonville just before he left for Pats, but I wouldn't know as much about him as you. But he comes very highly regarded. They paid a transfer fee for him, so they obviously think he's a player. But I've seen a lot of Connor Keeley. I'd make it to a lot of Drogheda games during the year. And for me, he was one of the top performing centre-backs in the country last season. So that's a heck of a signing for Pats. I think he's a ready-made partner for Joe Redmond. I think that will be the partnership of the season if they both stay fit. You've got Gravosky there. They've brought in Turner. They've brought in a young lad on loan from Hull as well. They've stacked that back line up. So I think that's maybe a contingency plan if something does go wrong injury-wise this year. They've got the numbers to compete on all fronts. And if you look across the squad, they've brought in Aaron Bulger from Cork. I think he'll give good support to Jamie Lennon, who, for me, is by far and away the best number 6 in the country. They've brought in a couple of strikers as well. Rory Keaton's come from Cork. He was brilliant last season. They brought in Cian Kavanagh from Derry. I think he'll be the backup striker. But they've basically got 2 players for every position. And that's exactly what you need if you're going to compete on all fronts. So I think St. Pat's will put up a serious title challenge this season.
Derry are the cousins here for anybody that follows the Irish League, and we always have a keen eye on them. And talking to anybody who is a Derry City man, their big issue, or at least one of the things that irked them, was their lack of goal scoring, and they've addressed that, or looked to address that, in a big way. For those who don't know, Hooban is a ready-made striker, has scored lots and lots of goals in this league. He may be edging towards the end of his career, but if they're looking for a ready-made goal scorer who's been there and done that, he kind of is the man, isn't he?
He is the man, and I think what they've not only got a proven goal scorer. I know you pointed out there that maybe he's into his early 30s now, but I think what they're getting is a very hungry striker as well. So I think Pat Hooban's departure from Dundalk I think it's fair to describe it as a bit acrimonious for a club legend, the club's all-time leading goal scorer, over 150 goals. The way he left the club, I think it was a little bit sour in the end. I think it left a sour taste. It probably in Pat's mouth. I know he hasn't really said too much about it, but I get the sense from speaking to him at his first press conference. There's a real fire in the belly there. He wants to prove people wrong, and I think that will very much be in Derry City's favour this season.
Elsewhere, one of the things we talked about last year was, could Cork come up and establish themselves? And unfortunately, that didn't happen. What happened to Cork last year?
They just didn't strengthen at all. We kind of called it actually on our podcast.
You did actually.
Even before they had clinched the title, we were saying if this Cork team goes up, which was clear from a long way out, they were going to win the league. They're going to have to invest substantially because obviously I'm a Longford Town fan. I'm watching First Division football every week. The standard over the last couple of seasons in the division has been extremely poor, extremely weak, and that's why I'd actually fear for Waterford and Galway coming up. Particularly Galway, I don't think they've done any business really that would overly excite me. I think Hickey coming from Athlone is a good sign of it. Again, he's a player who's going to have to step up a level in terms of the league he was in last year. But the standard of the First Division, it's very, very weak compared to the top teams in the Premier Division. So if you're coming up, you need to invest. Cork didn't do that, and they paid the price. And as I said, I'd be worried for Waterford and Galway coming up this season.
UCD, in the end, they weren't able to survive after tricking along for a couple of seasons. They were relegated with ease, if that's a way you could describe it. But you talk about the teams that have went up from the First Division, Waterford and Galway. They were gunning for it last year. They achieved what they wanted to. Looking at the top division now, will they be some of the favourites to go down? Could the likes of Dundalk maybe be dragged down, surprisingly, with the way they've set their team up?
I actually think the relegation dogfight is going to be more intriguing than anything in this league this season. I mean, there's several teams there. I'd be very worried for Sligo. I think we've pointed out on our pod, we feel they're a club that's been on the slide for a number of seasons now. I mean, they're going into the season, it's a week away. They've only got 17, 18 players at most. I think I read the other day 14 outfield signed up. That's a very light squad. They've signed players as well that have a very checkered injury history, players that haven't played a lot of football over the last couple of seasons. They've let a few experienced players go. I'd be worried for Sligo. Outside of Galway and Waterford, they're obvious. I think they're obvious relegation contenders because they're coming up from the First Division, and it's a huge gap to try and bridge. I think other teams you're looking at there, you've mentioned Dundalk. I think it's going to take this Dundalk team a long time to gel. They've signed a lot of players, particularly on loan from the UK and Scotland. Those sort of signings have a more of a hit or more of a miss rate than a hit rate probably in this league, I would imagine. But I've seen them a couple of times in pre-season, and I think they'll be okay once they find their feet, but it will take them a little bit to gel. Their first game is Rovers away, so it could be a difficult start to the season for Dundalk. And if they do get off to a slow start, it'll be interesting to see how they react to that. Pressure will come on the manager. How will he react to it? Bohs could be dragged into it as well. I mean, Bohs fans by far and away have been the most negative about their side in pre-season. They are not happy one bit about the business they've done or the lack of business they would feel that they've done. They obviously had a really poor end to last season, losing the cup final with a really flat display, falling out with the top four, and missing out on Europe altogether after being up in those top four places for much of the season. So there's a lot of negativity going into the new season for Bohs. And again, if they get off to a slow start, I think we all know what's going to happen next there.
You talk about the business being done. We've mentioned some of the big names. A topic that we touched on last year was players coming from other areas of Europe, Estonia being one of them. I've seen that's continued.
Yeah, there's been quite a number of Estonian players, not just this season, but there seems to have been a good bit of incoming from that league into the League of Ireland over the last few years, particularly at Sligo. But again, I think more of a hit rate than a miss rate than a hit rate, I would say. A lot of these players that are coming over, they're Estonian internationals as well. So I suppose they're coming in with that little bit of expectation behind them, but more often than not, they've left us a little bit disappointed. So we'll have to see. Bohs have signed an Estonian striker. There's a couple have gone in across the league. It'll be interesting to see how they get on.
So down to the First Division, Cork are down there. Are they the favourites to bounce back up, or have they got a bit of work to do? I know they weren't in the same kind of state the likes of Finn Harps was going down, but they weren't even in with a shout last year.
They're the automatic favourites to win the division. I think on reputation, they're a massive club. Shouldn't be in this position, but here we are once again. Cork relegated for the second time in the space of a few years. They bounced back quite quickly. They took 1 year kind of to steady themselves last time, and then they properly went at it, and they went up with ease a couple of years ago. There'll be no bedding in period this time. Tim Clancy's the new manager. I think that's a big bonus. I think that's a good appointment because, okay, it didn't really work out from a St. Pat's, but last season was a complete disaster at Cork in terms of the management there. I mean, the start of the season with Colin Healy, he stepped aside. There was then this long period where there was no manager appointed. The Dermot Usher, the owner, he was on our podcast. Liam Buckley was appointed as a sporting director. This was at a time when they had no manager. I asked Dermot the direct question, is there a chance we'll see Liam Buckley managing this Cork team this season? Categorically, no, wasn't in the running for the job. Lo and behold, he takes the team, and the rest is history. They couldn't stay up in the end. But I think Tim Clancy going in there, he'll be a real figurehead. He's a good man manager. I think he'll have a good stronghold on that dressing room, because I think you only have to look at performances towards the end of last year. I think it got a little bit toxic in that Cork City dressing room. There was a lot of players that seemed to down tools, and that's why they are where they are. They've made some big signings, some big statement signings. Greg Bulger, hugely experienced player, coming towards the end of his career, but he should be well able to manage himself through the first division. They've signed Sean Murray as well, who was obviously up north, but would be very well known down here from his time at the Dock. Quality player. He's been absolutely besieged with injuries over the last couple of years, but again, type of player, if he can just manage himself through the first division, he'll have a huge impact in that league. So look, they're expected to go up. Anything other than that won't be acceptable to the Cork fans. So that's one thing they're going to have to deal with, is pressure.
Here's something I've been keen to talk to you about. We touched on it last year, and perhaps it was a bigger headline in this side of the border, but the Americans that came in with their millions saying, what about this All-Ireland League? How did that go down in League of Ireland circles? It was shot down quite quickly, but did that turn a few heads at all?
Judging by media reports, some of the people running the clubs weren't too happy with how quickly that was shut down. They didn't really have much of a say in it. There was no real consultation from what I've been reading. So that's disappointing, because again, the FAI, the new FAI, as they like to brand themselves, they're supposed to be all about transparency and doing things in a different manner. But I think that would still be a complaint from League of Ireland people, that there's not enough transparency. So there's a lot of work to do there. I'd love to hear more about that plan myself, but I've only probably read what you've read. It's intriguing. I know some people look at the figures and say it's all pie in the sky, but I'd really love to hear a little bit more about it. But unfortunately, we didn't really get much of an opportunity.
It was an interesting story, just the amount of money that was being pitched. And I guess I know within Irish League circles, there was the whole, pitch a couple of years ago, which we talked about, with the idea that this pitch was very much with the idea of investment here, TV rights, and all the rest. And it's one of those things that will probably rumble on. Broadly within the league, is there any kind of stories going into this year that we keep an eye on? I imagine trying to progress in Europe will be key for all these teams when that time eventually comes around in the summer. I think we've seen now with the Europa Conference League settling itself, and teams from what we would probably consider lesser nations getting into that group stage, it doesn't seem to be as much of an anomaly anymore, and it's probably a real key aim for the size of teams that are up at the top of that division.
Yeah, there was a good news story today. I haven't really got following it fully yet, but I know there's been an increase in the prize money announced, which is desperately needed. But the big prize for winning the League of Ireland Premier Division is that Champions route in the UEFA competitions. I mean, if you lose your first round game of the Champions League, you're into the Europa League, you fall down into the Conference League. So you can just win through a round or two in the Champions League, you're almost guaranteed a place in the Conference League, which is absolutely huge financially. You're talking the guts of 3 million there, and plus add-ons. Then if you can do well in the competition, so that's the carrot that's on offer for Shamrock Rovers again this season, and hopefully they'll at least get to some sort of playoff round. That's the least we really expect from them now at this stage, which is a nice thing to say, I suppose.
It's so different, I guess, from an outsider's point of view of where the leagues were, a number of years ago. Let's finally end with a little bit of a chat about your Longford Town. I mean, anybody listening to this, I'm sure you'll hope that they'll all have a wee eye out for them. Results-wise, you felt they could have been in the mix last year. Do you feel as though this could be the year for your side to make a run at potentially getting into the big time?
Yeah, well, a lot of your listeners probably won't know this is a massive year for the football club. It's their centenary year, so I know there's a real burning desire from people within the club to make this a real special one on and off the pitch. So there's, I suppose, a little bit of pressure there for the manager and the players to deal with. They know what's expected of them. Last year was a complete write-off. I mean, Longford lost their manager. There was a mass exodus of players. There was then a kind of a time gap between appointing the manager leaving and appointing a new manager, and that allowed then clubs to come in, pick off our best talent. So we had to really go shopping for inexperienced players, very young players. The few senior players we did have, a lot of them picked up injuries. So young players that were, the expectation was just to bed them in slowly. They had to play 30 plus league games. So it was really baptism of fire for them. When Longford did start to get a settled side in the summer, they got a few experienced players in the window, started to get a few experienced players back from the treatment table. They actually put a run of form together, and it looked like they were going to finish in those playoff places, but then it all fell to ribbons towards the end of the season, and they didn't miss out by far. And like, considering what a disastrous, I suppose, pre-season it was, I look at Longford now, they're in such a stronger position. They've got a good core group there. They've made plenty of good signings. They've got a good pre-season under the belt. I spoke to the manager the other day. He felt they were undercooked last season in terms of friendlies and preparation, all the rest. That won't be the case now. I think they're playing 8 pre-season games before the first game at home to Finn Harp. So, yeah, I'm very hopeful it'll be a better year. I think the minimum expectation that has been set by the supporters is a place in the playoffs. So anything less than that would be hugely disappointing.
I almost forgot. Kerry was one of the big stories going into last year. I know it was a bit of a development year, just find their feet. Will it be the same again for Kerry FC, or could this be the year they push on and start to assert themselves in that division?
We'll definitely see improvement and progress. I mean, they've got 20 plus points to find on the team above them, so that's a huge gap to try and bridge. So I don't expect them to see them shooting up the table, but they only won 1 league game last season. I expect them to win multiples of that this season. They're a bit like Longford. I spoke to Billy Dennehy, who's no longer the head coach anymore. He's moved upstairs. They've got a coach coming in. Actually, a good story in itself. He's only 25 years of age. He's the youngest ever League of Ireland manager or head coach. So that's something to watch out for.
Wow.
This season. But again, they've actually been able to go out and sign players from other first division clubs, so players that have experience under the belt. Where I think last season, speaking to Billy, he put a real emphasis on trying to get some experienced players in, but it's the wrong type of experienced players that have been away from the league for a number of years. They were playing in local leagues or regional leagues, and when they came back into the League of Ireland, they just weren't up for it physically. Whereas he's gone out and got actual established first division players now to complement some of the really good talent they've got there. And they had a game the other night in the Munster Senior Cup at home to Cove Ramblers. Cove played a very strong team, and Kerry beat them 1-0. It was the first home game they had won against the League of Ireland team since they joined the league. So that was a big thing for them. Maybe they can go and win that trophy. That would be great to see them get some silverware. But I think that's a sign that they'll be much more competitive on the pitch this season.
Excellent. Kieran, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. Hopefully now all my Irish League following listeners will be more informed to talk about the League of Ireland, at least ahead of the new season. I'm sure people who listen to me have a keen eye and ear on other leagues, and they might want to dip into some League of Ireland content when they wrap up with me every week. I'm obviously here to recommend you being the man with your podcast Between the Stripes. Go on, give it a plug. How can people maybe follow the League of Ireland via your podcast?
Yeah, we'd love to have as many Northern Irish League fans as possible tuning in. I dipped into a few games myself during the off season. I went up to watch Newry and Cliftonville there. So if there's anyone like-minded that'd like to dip into League of Ireland a bit more this season, just search for Between the Stripes LOI podcast. We're on all the podcast platforms, so Apple, Spotify, Google Pods, Amazon Music, all of them. You'll find us there. Or you can go to our website, betweenthestripes.net, where there's loads of extra content as well. And we're on Twitter. Just search for Between the Stripes and you'll find us.
Amazing. There you go. That's the first annual thing I've ever done on this podcast. 2 in a row. All going well. Look forward to chatting to you next year, Kieran.
Brilliant stuff, Peter. Thanks so much for your time.
If you're new here, thanks for joining me. I usually chat about Irish League pods, which I'm sure you can find like over 70 of them elsewhere on this feed, in case you want to hear what I do when I'm not interviewing somebody about another league. And if you want to hear more about this podcast, good way about doing that is by following this pod on the socials. It's Kick a Match on Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter. You can always make this podcast go hands-free in the future. Just ask your smart speaker, hey, please play Kicking Match, an Irish League podcast. I'll be with you later on in the week with your ready salted usual weekly edition of Irish League Chat. Until then, thanks for joining me. I'll chat to you soon.